2022 is a year I'm constantly hearing from people was lacking when it came to video game releases. And sure, there weren't a ton of major, huge budget AAA games, but I still had all sorts to choose from when it came to making my list this year. There were a ton of good games, especially if you look a little bit outside the mainstream. But without further delay, let's get into it and take a look at my top 10 for 2022. Immortality was a game I wasn't entirely sure about prior to its release. I enjoyed Her Story quite a bit when it came out, and it made my top 10 for that year. But with the release of Telling Lies, I became a little concerned that Her Story was pretty much the only kind of game they were ever going to make, just with slight little twists. Immortality, however, more than demonstrates there's still plenty of gas in the tank over there. The ways that you can directly interact with the clips in this game and expand on them more than you could in prior games makes this a way more interactive experience than either of the games that preceded it. Moreover, the core concept being the exploration of works by an actress fits perfectly with the clip-watching nature of the game, and even allows it to function well on a controller for the first time. But as always, what you're coming here for is the plot. And while the core plot in Immortality is definitely dramatically less grounded and much more esoteric, that helps to differentiate it from its direct predecessors, and more than earns it a spot here on my list. Previous Xenoblade Chronicles games have never really managed to fully hook me. Granted, when it comes to the sprawling games that these are, that often means that I played 30 some odd hours before dropping them. But Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was the game that finally managed to grab me and keep me playing for the full and rather lengthy duration. The combat's a lot of fun, the job system and leveling works really well, but what impressed me the most was how much I was enjoying the story. A rarity for JRPGs, to be sure. Both the main quest and all the side quests come together to create a world full of stories that are all really well told. And your party is full of characters that are actually interesting, all with their own unique perspective on what's going on. Now, there are certainly points at which it perhaps gets a little bit too stereotypically anime, but for the most part, I was really impressed with how well they were treating their subject matter and all the periphery stuff around it. This game is a huge ask in terms of the sheer amount of things there are to do and how long it's going to take most people, but I think in this case, it's more than worth it. Monkey Island is one of those series that I'd never say I didn't expect a sequel to come out. Franchises basically exist to be occasionally milked for profit. Even Disney, who generally keeps the old LucasArts stuff under lock and key, sometimes is willing to do a deal to make something happen. But what I wouldn't have ever guessed was that Ron Gilbert would have the chance to make it. That he would actually take that chance, and that what would come out of it would actually hold up to the ridiculous standards that I hold the series to. The writing is incredibly sharp, but much more modern than it was in the past. The puzzles are great and rarely frustrating, and when they are, there's a fantastic little hint system that gives you gradual hints instead of just immediately giving you the answer. The animation style that people so widely maligned before release works incredibly well with the game's tone. It's pretty much all here. Now, while some people may not like the ending, what I like is that Return to Monkey Island is a game that ostensibly wraps up the series in the exact way that Gilbert wants to. In fact, he more or less explicitly tells you so in the game. And that sort of creative freedom is something that's greatly lacking. Tunic is a game that I wish I could universally recommend. The way it handles exploration, the gradual discovery of abilities through collecting pages of an in-game manual, and its puzzles are all things that I've hardly ever seen a game do as well as it does. But while I may be able to handle and mostly set aside its combat personally, I know many people who cannot. The game does contain some settings for a no-fail mode, no damage, etc., but I would rather have it contain some difficulty settings instead. I can't help but compare its combat and bosses quite negatively in comparison to a game doing sort of the same top-down Souls thing in Death's Door. If I could take the combat of that game and smash it together with literally everything else about Tunic, I would have my perfect game. But still, I feel like I'm spending too much time justifying a choice on my personal list here. The fact is that Tunic does several really amazing things with its in-game manual, and it harkens back to a time when you did find secrets in the manual, when you could go an entire game without knowing everything your character could do, just because you didn't deeply peruse a few small sheets of paper that were stapled together and stuffed in the box. The ways that Tunic expands on that concept, on that history, in really intelligent, enjoyable ways, I think outshines its somewhat lackluster and uninteresting combat. Citizen Sleeper is a game about living a life, however sparse that life might be. Put into a synthetic body, the rogue property of a corporation, the early phases of the game are spent constantly trying to survive, hoping that your dice rolls are lucky enough to insert into the right slots and keep on living and breathing and eating on this space station, all while keeping your mechanical body from literally rotting out from under you. Throughout, it has some incredible writing and stories on top of stories to explore, with a huge number of ways your own personal story can end. But as you progress, you'll find that life is getting easier. You're more free to do what you want instead of fighting to just survive here. And you keep making new friends and new enemies. That ramp creates a really great feeling progression that you don't always find in story-centric games. And while it does mean that the interaction between the dice and the world you're in decreases as you spend more time in it, your interactions with characters can come to the fore in a way that I really enjoyed. If there's a single word that you use to describe Neon White, there's no doubt that the most appropriate one is fast. The entire game is spent moving along at incredible speeds, collecting and playing weapon cards, trying to get faster and faster and faster times, and grabbing hidden collectibles along the way. Speedrunning is something I've only ever dabbled with here and there, but Neon White does a great job of representing it in microcosm, especially when the game was new and a ton of people on my friends list were all playing it at once. You could just try for the golds, you could go for ace medals, or you could go even further to try and beat the developer's own times, or your friends. The strategies got crazier and crazier as time went on, and people got better and better at it. I tailed along for a lot of it, and I had some of the most fun I had playing a game all year. That being said, I could really take or leave the story bits of the game. The developers do seem to have realized this though, and you can skip through pretty much all the dialogue you want, and it does often feel like it's kind of making fun of the sort of hyper-anime stylings it has. But it also just has a little bit too much of that stuff for it to feel like good satire instead of just imitation. While I may have really liked Monkey Island as a sort of look back at the adventure games of the past, Norco is the game that was doing really awesome new stuff in the adventure game space this year. It's deeply and darkly funny to an extent I wasn't really expecting, with well-built modern mechanics, a great art style, and a really well-realized story and world that just goes for it. in a really awesome way that I really respect. Something just feels off in this world where you know it isn't our world, but it's something very close, and it's something that could very well be our own future. If you think you might know where this game is going at any given moment, with pretty much any of its components, you almost certainly don't. Or it's going to go there, but about 500 times more wild than you're thinking. I loved playing this entire thing from start to finish multiple times, interacting with all the weird one-off gags that I had missed the first time, and then there's the characters that I grew to love over my time with the game. But of course, any game comes down to the themes and the story at its very core, and Norco manages to absolutely nail that stuff as well. Norco is what I hope adventure games continue to become. Less focus on puzzles, more focus on world and stories, but without losing the razor-sharp wit that we've all grown to love adventure games for. Signalis is another game that has an incredible world to be discovered in it. A lot of people out there have gone into way more depth on this than I could ever hope to do, and have done it a lot more justice. But there's also this amazing story that's crammed full of meaning in this world that's also filled to the brim with that kind of detail, and the kind of symbolism that you so rarely see in the video game space, or really any space with any regularity. More than that, though, it's paired with a game that's absolutely incredible to play, that recalls the PS1 horror games of the past, as well as Metal Gear Solid. This is an absolute feast for fans of the early days of Polygonal 3D. It plays great, it looks great, and I've already spent enough time gushing about its world and story. This game made me realize that actually, I kind of miss those old-style survival horror games. We talk a lot about how much fixed perspective cameras sucked, and how much the inventory management could suck. But in both of those arenas, Signalis proves that you can do those things really well, and have them be incredibly compelling mechanics that actually add to the game, along with introducing plenty of its own new twists on the survival horror genre. The Case of the Golden Idol is one of those games that feels really weird to have at my number 2. I feel like these sorts of things are constantly happening in my top 10 lists, but with this game, it just feels like in so many other years, it would have been at the top. This game has so much stuff that I absolutely love. It has a deep, overarching story that the game mostly leaves you on your own to figure out, and great puzzles you can find the solutions to without having to cheat. The game this is probably most directly comparable to is Return to the Obra Dinn, another game I absolutely adored when it came out. But in The Case of the Golden Idol, you're solving mysteries presented by several different dioramas. With each level, you're given a frozen moment in time where you can look around the environment, inspect it, listen to what people are saying, find out what they have in their pockets, what's hidden in drawers, what's in safes, all sorts of stuff about the world they're in. And then you can go back and use all that information to fill in the blanks, the literal blanks that the game gives you. It gives you this template by which to figure out what's going on, and that template has bigger and bigger blanks as you get deeper into the game. In addition, as the game progresses, you'll start to see recurring characters as it becomes more and more clear that all these individual dioramas are all interconnected. You'll gradually start to piece that together even without the game's help. It strikes this fantastic balance between holding your hand to get you where you need to go, while also letting you figure out enough on your own that you feel really accomplished and smart. And then, as the game progresses and those blanks get bigger, you do actually start understanding and figuring things out yourself. It has a really good progression in that way. By the time you get to the final level, the game asks you to basically just piece everything together and figure out how everything ended. And it's one of the most satisfying moments in video games that I had in 2022. Here we are at what's probably the most common number one game for anyone putting together a top 10 list. But hey, what can I say? Elden Ring got its hooks in me, and it didn't let go for about 100 hours. This is all I played until I finished it. What From Software has achieved with this game is really nothing short of incredible. It's a pretty good Souls game. For starters, the combat feels good, and I liked what they did with the summonable ashes as a substitute for having summonable players, which you can still use, but the ashes are perfectly fine on their own. But that's not what really kept me around this time. For the first time in a Souls game since the non-linear experimentation of Demon Souls, if you hit a dead end somewhere, you can just turn around. Go try your hand at something else. In the past, if I had a boss that I was banging my head against, in almost all cases, I'd have to just try again, and again, and again, until I maybe eventually just got really angry and summoned someone to help me beat it. But here, everywhere you go on the map, there's something new to look at. It's not always unique. There are definitely some repeat things that are scattered around, but they're so few and far between that it's easily forgivable. It always feels like there's something new, always something new to find over the horizon. And that's almost always true. Every little crevice and hole has something to do. And the sense of discovery that Elden Ring offers is absolutely unbeatable. Elden Ring is basically the way I think all open world games should be. You just let loose in this world with your character. Nothing automatically marked on your map. No towers to climb to find more icons. Just freedom. And that's a feeling that Elden Ring absolutely nails to its great credit.